Hello there guys, it's Joey, and today's video is going to be talking about the Goddess Morrigan and mental health. And this has been a video which was requested, and it's taken me a little while to sit down and record it for a number of reasons. There were a number of thoughts that I needed to process and sort of contemplate to myself until I got to the point where I felt, right, I can make a video and we can talk about it, about the Goddess Morrigan and mental health. And again, somebody has been told, if you suffer from any kind of mental illness, you can't worship the Goddess Morrigan. So again, I am recording a video to speak out against that kind of discrimination for a large part of it. The thing about mental health is it's a really vast subject, and there are many kinds of mental illness, ranging from the more common, the more manageable, and even within themselves, things such as depression and anxiety, which I can talk about specifically because I understand them, because I go through them. I suffer with depression. I can talk about those things a little bit more in depth, a little bit more from a experience perspective. However, even within my experience of depression and working and walking a Celtic path, there are going to be discrepancies to some people who go through a lot more severe depression and or have other variants that might have an element of bipolar and the emotional state. And then of course there is further and further down the line of things that impact on people's lives in a very specific way, and I can't speak to that, and I'm not a trained psychologist or psychiatrist, and whereas I have studied some psychology, I'm not going to make out to anybody that, I am a medical professional. I'm not. But my viewpoint is that when you're struggling with certain kinds of mental health, and it's down the line where you need care and help and medication even, to maintain a good standard of living for yourself and for those around you, then we need to sort of drop the shame that goes on and start treating it as a condition of health. I think that the problem with a lot of the mental health topic is people use it as a judgment, a critique, and a form of nastiness sometimes as well, as if it's not an illness. It's like if you were suffering with a heart complaint, you would eat better, you would take any medication you would require, you would seek the doctor's assistance, and it would just be an illness of the heart. So why an illness of the brain is treated so differently, and I think it's largely because we don't understand it fully, and there's a lot of a fear factor attached to it. There's no one simple answer to getting health and getting help. So I think there is a large aspect of fear surrounding the issue, the concept, the discussion of mental health. And like I said, it's a huge, vast variety of many different illnesses. That it's a broad term that encapsulates a lot. And so because of that, we're not even going to be covering like half of it, not even half of it. We're going to be sticking to what I can talk to you about, what I've experienced, and how my viewpoints are on this. I think the first point to really cover, I've covered that. I think that if you require assistance, if you require help, then you need to be seeking that. That is part of your path to heal and help yourself as much as you can, and to rid yourself of shame and guilt that's attached to the mental illnesses. And I think dealing with the idea of fear and shame and guilt are all very, very strong warrior Morrigan-esque themes that come into our scope no matter who we are. And it's just another way of accepting other people, embracing other people, helping other people, or judging other people, using it as an insult, using it as a way to deride people. And to deride people on the basis of mental health, which is something for the large part people, it's not something people ask for, the same way people don't ask for a heart defect or, you know, a liver complaint or whatnot. Yeah, there tends to be things in all aspects of health that we can do to lead to a sort of a healthier self, but people, you know, aren't like asking for depression and aren't asking for anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia or, you know, any of the other mental conditions. So when individuals come to me and they say, you know, I suffer with depression and I've been told that I can't walk this path with Goddess Morrigan, I feel like out there somewhere is like this made-up book of rules about working with gods and goddesses that people pull out and tout when they feel the need to be superior to other individuals. Suffering with any kind of mental illness doesn't make you any lesser than anybody else, and it just means that you have a different perspective on life, you have a different understanding of who you are as an individual, the path that you walk. It can be damn hard, and you know, they've talked about in medical professions how depression is passed on genetically, and often through the female line, and there are many factors to the causes of illnesses such as depression. And like I said earlier, there is a range as well about how badly depression affects individuals. So this is the one aspect of mental health that I can talk about and have talked about previously, but I'm going to talk about it in perspective of why I don't think it takes away from my Morrigan-esque path and why it actually is a part of my Morrigan-esque path. It's not to glorify depression at all. It's a struggle, it's a fight, and it's difficult. It's not something to be glorified, it's not something to be vilified either. It just is. It's just part of individuals, it's part of me, it's part of this path that I'm walking along. I've discussed in the past that depression is a battle, and sometimes you don't win. Like some days depression throws you over a cliff and there ain't nothing to do but fall, and you cry and you get down and you feel it very deeply, and it can be very troublesome for people who are quite empathic and they feel so deeply. And I think there is a correlation between empathic people and depression, and people who feel so deeply and getting to a point where the emotional state causes a mental imbalance, causes a chemical imbalance. I think all those energies sort of can easily cause the misfires, if you like, in the brain, the energetic disconnects of deep sadness, and learning to cope, learning to function, learning to recognize the signs, learning to overcome, learning to fight and battle things such as depression is part and parcel of a Morrigan-esque way of life. It's part of a warrior path. I talked last week about different types of warriors, about how there are sort of a physical warrior path, and then there's more of a spiritual or emotional side, and you know, fighting on behalf of causes that speak to us. And we do choose many of our battles based on personal experiences, things that we've been through, things that we feel. Oh, that was interesting. Sorry about that. And things that mean something to us, you know, they're personal. Our battles are all personal. I feel that, you know, we don't fight battles just because they affect us on some level personally. We have a deep-rooted feeling in many of the battles that we engage with, and sometimes these are toxic and no good for us, and sometimes they shine a light on parts of us that we need to work on in ourselves in terms of shadow work, in kind of evaluating what triggers us, why it triggers us. Is this helpful to our higher selves? Is this part of who we want to be? Is this holding us back? Is this poisoning us? And it can be really, really hard. And when you suffer from something like depression, things can get a little bit blown out of proportion, because that's what depression does. It's like a deep void that swallows you, and it doesn't often make rational sense. And trying to explain it to someone who doesn't suffer can be quite difficult, because you're feeling a well of emotion that isn't necessarily logical, and it's usually very, very sad, and you're feeling really, it's beyond sad though, it's a void, it's an emptiness, it's extreme loneliness, it's being really, really hard on yourself. And I think you have to be careful when walking the spiritual path not to allow spiritual practices to actually make things like this worse. So part of the spiritual practice is shadow work, is examining the darker sides of ourselves. I use darker with quote marks because it's just easier for phrasing, but I don't enjoy the idea of the dark side of the self being negative, because it's not. But, you know, we have to be careful that we don't become our own worst critics, and when we are looking at these aspects of ourselves that we need to work through, we're not sort of caving into things such as depression. It's a fine line. You have to approach shadow work and that side of yourself with pure love. You have to love all sides of yourself. You have to see the ugly parts and stop calling them ugly. You have to see the beauty in all sides for the self. And that's why self-love is really important. And it kind of gets thrown around like a trigger term, but what it really is an honouring of yourself, an honouring of who you are, a respecting of yourself. And that sort of journey to inner contemplation, self-mastery, is something we touched on in the New Might video, is the path of the magician, the path of the magic worker, the path of the spirit walker, the path of the warrior, to really fully gain mastery over the self and really understand the self and be friendly and love yourself for who you are. It's incredibly difficult, and this is why when people sort of say to, you know, oh well, if you suffer with this mental condition you can't be on the path of the Morrigan, I kind of go, what? Like, seriously, this is some of the hardest crap that people have to deal with. I know, I deal with it. And it's difficult, and it can throw you off balance, and you have to regain your balance. You have to gain your sure footing. You have to fight back. And that's a very warrior-esque way of looking at dealing with mental health. And it's obviously not the only way of looking at how to deal with all elements of aspects of the self. And I'm never going to tell anybody that they shouldn't be the healer rather than the warrior, and they shouldn't be seeking out help if they require it, because I think we have to go into these things with a sense of sense, like common sense, not to disregard science. I don't disregard science ever, and I think it's really dangerous when we think that because something is spiritual or magical, we completely dismiss the ideas that are tested, proven, and helpful in science. I think, again, I've said this before, and it's a quote that, you know, magic is just science that we don't understand yet. And it's just aspects of the self that are hard to quantify. And we talk in terms of energy all the time. But I don't agree with the going down the road of you can completely dismiss all forms of sort of scientific medicine just because you're on a spiritual path. And I understand that people prefer to go back to herbalism and go back to natural forms of healing, but at the I always hear Jeremy Kyle in my head when I say this, but at the end of the day, go to search that song, it's fantastic. But at the end of the day, if you require the medicine to cure you of whatever it is, or to help you manage whatever it is, then that's not something you should be ignoring just because you think it's not spiritual for whatever reason. And I think the blatant disregard of the more mundane side, the less spiritual side, if you like, the scientific side, is foolish and is just sort of taking on a sort of ego trip that spirituality is more, spirituality is better, spirituality knows things that medical professionals don't. I was like, come on. Like, if somebody requires the medication, if someone requires the chemotherapy, if someone requires the counselling, whatever it might be, then that's just part and parcel of something that is required for the battle. And, you know, Morrigan Pathways is about evaluating all the things on the battlefield, all of them, the politics, the magic, the medicine, the broken bones, the physical, all of it, taking it all into account in order to conquer what's going on. At a certain point, if your quality of life is really, really suffering and there is a tendency to go down spiritual means rather than getting help, I think you're taking your spirituality to a toxic place. I think that spirituality is very alongside life. It can weave through every aspect of life. It can be part of who you are in every way. But to completely ignore all the other elements, all the other aspects of life is kind of like cutting off one of your legs. It's like, why don't you just embrace all of it and take everything you can do and fight with everything you can fight with? It's like dropping a shield and just fighting with a sword because you think it's more badass that way. That's like the simplified way. It's like, if that shield is going to defend you, is going to stop you getting harmed, is going to, you know, stop you from getting your limb cut off, then hold that shield high and be proud of that as part of who you are. And I think there is a tendency in a lot of spiritual circles to kind of disregard these side paths that help and support. People don't tend to be so bad with things such as counselling and talking to somebody, because that's the open expression of emotion, and people are a little bit more on board with that. Medication is another subject which I think a lot of people have very strong feelings on. I get to the point where, like, it depends on how you are. If you require it, then you require it, and there's no shame. I personally have never been on medication for depression. I know it has a lot of side effects. I know it can really deteriorate life in a lot of ways. But if I was at a point where I absolutely had to be on it, then I would be on it. I'm not. I've managed and coped without it. And that's not to say one way or the other that it's better or worse than people who have suffered differently. It's just the truth of it. It's just the fact of it, of how I have personally, to date, coped and lived. Do I think mental illness takes away from my path? No, I think it just is part of who the goddess made me, and I don't understand where, like, the insult in terms of mental health comes, and people using it to deride and be derogatory. I think there's a fear element, there's a need to tear people down in that, and I think, you know, that it says more about the person doing it than the person who is accused of it, and it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something to be thrown about as an insult. It's something to really be examined, something that we should just be saying, you know, this is just part of humanity. It's just part of human suffering, and we're supposed to be compassionate beings. That's supposed to be what spirituality is supposed to be about, like learning to be compassionate amongst many other things. So I hope I covered some of the main bases with this video. It's a difficult video for me to really go in as depth as I would like, because it's such a varied subject. There are so many elements of mental health, and I have discussed depression at quite some lengths, quite some depths before. I don't really want to rehash all of that. So there is a video on this channel already called The Goddess Morrigan and Depression, and that goes into it a little bit more. And I hope this was helpful, however, because I know there's a couple of people who've been waiting for me to talk a little bit more about this. So if there are any questions, just pop them down below. I will do my best to get back to you. I'll make another video if I've missed something that people really want to discuss or know how I feel about it. Okay, so that's it for this particular video. Many blessings.